I would like to acknowledge that this video is being filmed on the traditional lands of the Wurrundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people who may be watching this video today. Hi guys, it's Steph here. This is the Novelty Corner. Welcome back to my channel. Today we have a Books Beside My Bed video where I am going to be talking about the books that I read from the 28th of January until the 4th of Feb. And I read 8 things in this week, which I'm kind of surprised by because I am totally brain dead after the first week of school. But here we are. I read a total of 2,200 books and my yearly reading total so far is 58 books for the year. The first book that I read this week was Match with the Demon by Chase Verity. This is the next installment in the Loved by the Demon series. These are all standalones, but they're set sort of in the same universe. So it's technically the third book, but you can read it in any order. This is actually the first demon romance in the series, and we have Harrison, who is a single dad to a teenager who has just gone off to college. He's also demisexual and hasn't been in a relationship for a long time, and his son encourages him to start dating again and to get on a dating app and to go out and meet people. And he meets this guy called Laszlo, and he goes out to a bar to meet him, and he's looking around for this guy that he's got a picture in his head of, and instead he sees what he thinks is a guy dressed up in an alien suit because he's got tentacles everywhere, so on and so forth. And as it turns out, this is Laszlo, and Harrison happens to be one of the very few humans who can see through a demon's glamour. Despite being slightly weirded out by Laszlo's appearance at first, Harrison continues with the date and the two talk and get to know each other. We discover that Laszlo was a pleasure demon but has decided to move on to other things and now currently works in trash management of some kind for the city. And it's just a very sweet story as they get to know each other, as they become friends and then lovers. And of course this is a demon monster romance, you've got tentacles involved, so take that as you will. It does get steamy, but because these are a novella length, the steam sort of happens in the last third of the book, so you actually get some decent development between the relationship, which is nice. Then I read Area 7 by Matthew Reilly. This is the second book in the Scarecrow series, or I think it's been renamed the Shane Schofield series, but I call it the Scarecrow series because that's what it originally was. And this is one of my favorite Matthew Reilly books. This book picks up after Ice Station, which is book 1, and after surviving the incident in Antarctica, Shane Schofield, or Scarecrow, who is a Marine, is reassigned to Marine 1 on a protection detail for the President of the United States. Some of his former teammates have chosen to be reassigned alongside him. You have Libby, or Fox, and Gina, who I've forgotten her last name, but her call sign is Mother, and they're all working for the Marine 1 detail. And on this particular day, they're guarding the president as he is visiting various scientific research stations in the middle of the desert. And they turn up at Area 7, which is some kind of viral scientific research station that is guarded by members of one of the Air Force's Special Forces divisions. Pretty much once they arrive there, they're attacked by that same Special Forces division. They discover a young boy who has been genetically created to be resistant to a virus that targets people by race, and they have to save the world again. And it's a lot of fun. It's completely bonkers. It's really thick, but it goes by super fast. And I thoroughly enjoyed my reread of it. I have not reread it in years. This, incidentally, has a special place in my heart because all of the Matthew Reilly books I had read beforehand, Ice Station, Contest and Temple, I had borrowed from my high school's library. Area 7 was the first book that was released after I had read those books, and I was gifted it for Christmas by my parents. Not this version of it, I had a different version, which I'm really annoyed because I can't find, and I'm really hoping I didn't get rid of it. But I was gifted that version for Christmas by my parents, and I stayed up all night reading that book. Like, I did not go to bed. My parents found me at 2 o'clock in the morning still in the chair in the living room reading the book when I was in year 9 or year 10, and they're like, can you just go to bed? And I didn't. I finished the book. It was that good. Then I read the next 2 books in Lily Mayne's Monstrous series. So the first one was The Rycke, which is about a monster that we have seen glimpses of in the previous books. This series is very much a dystopian series where there's a tear or a portal that basically connects our world to a world full of demon-like monster type creatures, and they slip through that portal and tear, and basically the United States, because that's where it's set, I don't know what the rest of the world is doing with their little portals and tears through to the other world. The population of the United States now either all lives along the coastal cities, or if they do choose to live inland, in what is now the wastes that constantly has monsters and all sorts of creatures roaming it, they are essentially raiders because they have to scavenge everything that they need because there is no infrastructure now left in the middle of the United States. So that's sort of the setting. And we follow Ari, who is a scavenger for a group of raiders, and he is out scavenging at a military facility, which it happens to be the military facility that is mentioned in book 1 and book 2, when he comes across a monster chained up still inside the facility. And this is the Rycke. And he and one of his companions manage to free the Rycke and notice that it is damaged and is really in no state to be left on its own. And so they take it back to their group, who are initially none too plussed to have a monster in their midst. The Rycke, who we find out his name is Gage, really doesn't display any violent tendencies and becomes quite close with Ari, and the two begin a relationship. However, Ari keeps hearing from people outside of his group that the Rycke is the most dangerous of all of the monsters and not to trust it, and that it's going to turn on them one day. And he doesn't believe that because Gage has been nothing but nice and charming and very meek. But then Gage goes with Ari to visit a neighboring raider community, and when that group threatens Ari's life, then he sees the truth of the Rycke and has to decide how to deal with the consequences of that. All of these books are really fun and engaging. They're all monster romances, and I really love this one because we've heard so much about the Rycke through the previous books, and to finally get that story was just great. And I love the contrast in Gage's character, so well worth checking out. And then I read the 3.5 novella Win, which is from the perspective of the monster from the first book in Soul Eater. This is entirely in Win's POV. It is post all of those books, and Win is trying to find a way for Danny to have an extended life so that he and Win can spend a longer period of time together. And in order to do that, they need to travel back to Win's homeworld, which means going through the portal. And the two basically go on this epic walking road trip to a seriously creepy temple-like place. And it's really fun because we get to see them get to know each other better. We get to see them address some of the issues in their relationship. And it was just really, really nice. I liked revisiting these characters and getting to see Win's world and really the world of all of the monsters that we meet in the series. So fantastic. Next, I read I Married a Merman by Regine Abel. This is the most recent release in the Prime Mating Agency series, which has been really fun, and I did enjoy this one, but it was not my favorite of the series. I'll be upfront right from the start. So this one is about Nira, who is a human who is really struggling on Earth. We find out that she is descended from a group of aliens who had come to Earth previously in the past, and now Earth's environment is becoming toxic for her because she is sort of stuck in this half-evolved state. It's advised that she try and get off planet and go to one of the worlds that has an environment better suited for her body's needs. And she can't afford to do that on her own, so she ends up going to the Prime Mating Agency to find a mate on another planet, and that would mean that all of her costs are offset. And so she is matched with Echo, who is a merman, and he is a precious cinnamon roll of a character. I really loved him. I loved his planet and his community, and like all of that stuff is really fantastic. So they have this marriage of convenience, but there is an attraction and a spark between the two of them, and they obviously grow into their relationship. I can't really put my finger on what it was that bothered me about this particular book because I quite liked the characters, I liked the premise, and you guys know I really like Regine Abel, but there was just something about this one that didn't sit right with me, and I'm still processing that, and if I think of it, I'll mention it in a future video. But it's not a bad book by any means. It's exactly on par with all the previous books in the series, but it just probably wasn't what I really wanted at this point in time. Take that as you will. Then I reread Not My Type by E.B. Mitchell. This is a contemporary romance written by an Australian author set in the US. It is about Frankie, who is in a wheelchair, and she runs a podcast all about accessibility. And she receives a request from a listener to do an episode on accessible bondage. In order to find out more about this, she turns to Jay, who runs classes on bondage at the local kink club, and the two have this spark, and then they decide to pursue it initially as friends with some benefits and then just fully in a relationship. I love the joy in this book. There are still moments of tense and stressful, and you have the ups and downs and, you know, the third act conflict and things like that. But the overall tone of this book is just so fun and joyful and playful, and there is fantastic banter in the book. I loved it. This is my second read through of it. The first time I read an ebook, this time I tabbed it all up, and there is so many things in here that I loved. By the time this wrap up goes up, I will have already have been part of the live show where we are talking to Evie Mitchell, so I will try and leave that linked on the screen so you can check it out, which was partially why I was rereading Evie Mitchell's book, because I just wanted to refresh my memory before we go into the live show, and I cannot wait. I also picked up another book by Evie Mitchell that I hadn't read yet. This is a novella in the Capricorn Cove series. It is book 5. The Capricorn Cove books are set in the same geographical location as Not My Type, and this one is a novella about Emily, who wakes up after being in a car accident and she can't remember the last 5 years. This is a bit of a problem because her estranged husband has memories of everything leading up to their separation, and yet Emily doesn't, and she's trying to piece together where everything went wrong. And she wakes up and realizes that she's extremely thin, and part of the reason why she was involved in the car accident was she passed out because she hadn't been eating, and she doesn't know how she got this way because her last memories of her are being engaged to Calvin, them having amazing plans, she was fit and she was healthy, and suddenly she's not. And so she has to dig into sort of the evolution of her life over the last 5 years. This one does include mentions of very toxic personalities and family members who have contributed to her decline, as well as mentions of eating disorders and body image issues. So be aware of that going into it, but it is a second chance romance, and it is short, and it was nice to read some of the additional stories around characters in Capricorn Cove because I'm slowly making my way through them all. And then finally, Brie and I buddy read How to Blow It with a Billionaire by Alexis Hall. This is the second book in the Arden St. Ives series. This is that 50 Shades of Grey but make it queer series, which I'm loving. And I love this book, but there are a lot of things that were drawn out in this, and Brie and I talked about it. There's a lot of conflict that is drawn out throughout the course of this book, and we're probably going to hold off on reading the third book for a little while just to give it a break. But I thoroughly love these characters, like, a lot. And being the second book in a series, we sort of see Arden and Caspian as they try and navigate this relationship. We have Caspian, who is a dominant and a sadist, but he's trying not to be those things, but he can't help but control everything around him. And you have Arden, who actually doesn't have an issue with that, but Caspian doesn't want to lose control around him. And a lot of this book has to deal with them trying to navigate this conflict in what they both want. And this doesn't leave off on an HEA or an HFN, so it is a romance, but it's also technically not a romance. I'm assuming we'll get to the HEA at the end of the third book. While reading it, and often reading some of their arguments, were really fascinating because Brie and I talked about how the fact that both of them have very, very valid points. They actually can't at this point in their story, they can't reach an agreement because they're not even on the same field at the moment, because they're just in two separate places. I find that really interesting. Like, I love reading about those dynamics because we know that we're eventually going to find some way to get past that, but we're not there yet. The one thing I will say about this book, there are mentions of a character who has attempted suicide in the past and currently uses drugs to cope with her life. I do love her though. She's a great, great character, and I love her relationship with Arden. We also find out a bit more about Caspian's past. So there will be content warnings in this one for sexual abuse of a minor, which is mentioned. It's not seen on page, it's mentioned to the extent that it would be considered grooming. So be aware of that going into it because it's mentioned. It is not unpacked in heaps of detail yet. I suspect it will be a little bit later on. Otherwise, consider this book extremely steamy. Like, it is hot. And Alexis Hall just knocks it out of the park in terms of the way he writes characters and relationships. So yes, I loved it. All right, everyone, that is everything that I read this week. In the comments, I would love to know if you have read any of these books or if you're planning on picking them up. Otherwise, feel free to share something that you have been reading and enjoying in the last week. I hope that wherever you're in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.